And a bit like in the previous video, then there's a command and control session set up. So some sort of shell goes back to our attacker, and now we've got that admin control. Of course, in this case, Richard goes back into his company, which is Opticon, and now our attacker's got some sort of presence inside that business. Good morning. My name is Matt Carling. To my own introduction, I'm an architect within a team within Cisco called the Security and Trust Organization. And some of you may have already attended some previous sessions run for the NetAcad program called Find Yourself in the Future. So this is today is also the third in that series. And Earl sort of presented a bit of the attacker landscape and the methods that they use. And I'm sort of going to pivot to the defenders side of the picture, and more what's the big holistic picture, or how should we approach this? So before we start, just introduce two concepts that I want to leave with you today. The first is, did I jump too far? Just go back one. Sorry, my slides just got swapped around on me. Defensible, so the ability to defend something. And the second one is defense in depth, okay? Like a layered approach to security. So, we can't be reliant on just, say, one security feature to protect us. That might, nothing is 100% effective. So we need, multiple things to protect us. You'll have, antivirus and strong passwords and firewalls and other things. So we build this layered model. So the analogy is to like a castle approach when we're talking about defense in depth or layered security. And see, this is a picture of Beaumaris Castle. Just stand out of your way there. It's somewhere in Wales. I haven't been to Wales, but I've flown over it thanks to Google Earth. And one thing I do like about it from a top-down view is you can see the layered defense approach. This was built sometime in around 1280, 1284. I'm not a big history student. But you can see, we've got a moat, we've got an outer wall, then an inner wall, there's some turrets, and I assume if it wasn't in ruins, there'd be an inner keep where the gold was kept. So you can see, an attacker to get in, has to, do some swimming, climb over a couple of walls, and no doubt there are arrows firing down. We've all seen movies. So that's sort of like the layered approach, and that applies to security space. But it's not a matter of just doing that. It's also about how do we operationalize that and make it defensible. We could build a massive, massive wall around our castle, but if we don't have enough sentries to go around and be lookouts, it's difficult to defend. And that's where, I've introduced things like frameworks, where we look at, well, what's the life cycle, or what's the operational model behind cybersecurity? So this one's from NIST, which is US National Institute of Standards and Technology. And see, they've got a framework around identifying assets, how are you going to protect, how are you going to detect, how are you going to respond and recover. So it really makes the defender's point of view, that's the life cycle of what you do. And as Earl pointed out, there's lots of roles when we go into the depths and different skill sets required in each of these different elements. So just start on defense in depth and layered defense. So, we're looking at Anatomy of Attack video, and so simplistically, we've got our baddie, our black hat, out on the internet. He's got some malware, or she, and wants to deliver to our users and inside our organization. So many people say, well, great, let's stick a firewall in the way, okay? And that's great, but as Earl pointed out, we like DNS to come in and out of our organization. So, trusted protocol, we let that through. So we need some additional layers. So you might say, oh, let's put some antivirus on our endpoints. Okay, that's great. We need more layers, and say, you know what? Just sending packets in and out of the network is not the only way. Maybe we need to cover our email. We just had a phishing attack in that demo. Maybe it's a web browser or some web exploit, so we need to cover our web channels, because there's multiple ways in and out of the organization. Maybe we'll put on some identity services. Let's just keep on going. Maybe we'll put malware detection everywhere. We want this DNS vector. We'll put some DNS protection. So Cisco's a solution called Umbrella. So you can see we start putting multiple layers of defense, and here's our equivalent of the castle. Okay, so now our black hat has to, defeat multiple layers. So should any one of those fail, hopefully we'll detect them somewhere else. And it also depends where they are in the life cycle of their attack. So the world would be great if it was just simple, where the black hats are out here and all our data and our users were nicely tucked away inside the organization. But of course, it's not like that today. In fact, we want to move all our data into cloud services. Our users like to be mobile. I mean, everyone's got mobile devices. We want to work from home. We want to work from coffee shops. So we need to say, well, we need to extend that layered approach, all over the organization. And so we end up building something like this. Okay, so how do we layer on different detection mechanisms, no matter where our users are and wherever our gold or our data goes. Of course, all those pipes flowing in between, apart from the black hat, of course, we need to protect that data. So that's where we have, encryption. We encrypt our data as we move it over the internet or use VPNs. So this is sort of like the defense in depth process. So there's a few anatomy of attack videos, and I focused on a different one, but the concept is still the same. So whilst we just watched one on a phishing attack, I'll build this one out. There's another anatomy of attack video, a series of these where it's a website compromise. Okay, so our malicious actor at home compromised a website and put some sort of attack or some sort of vulnerability on that site, and did cross-site scripting attack and some malicious script that our employee then goes and visits that site. Okay, so this person, Richard, is using his corporate laptop, and he's actually a member of a bowling club, and so he was logging on to check where they're sitting in the league. If you go and watch this video later, his machine gets compromised by there's some vulnerability on his machine. And a bit like in the previous video, then there's a command and control session set up. So some sort of shell goes back to our attacker, and now he's got that admin control. Of course, in this case, Richard goes back into his company, which is Opticon, and now our attacker's got some sort of presence inside that business. In that video, they start scanning around saying, "Oh, what can I find now I'm inside?" Okay, and one of the key things they find is some building automation systems, and specifically a thermostat that they can see from this laptop. And they use that to maintain a foothold. So they want to be able to come back into this organization over and over again. So that's the foothold for our malicious attacker, who then scans around the network at their leisure and eventually finds some blueprints, related to the company. So the truly high value IP or their gold in our castle model, and they exfiltrate that and they sell it to competitors. So we'll come back to this, but how would a layered defense approach and also a defensible approach help in this case? So I introduced defensible, and I showed this life cycle before around what are the different phases, and you can go through and read there, or maybe in very small font, the types of activities we need to do at different phases. And it starts off with identifying what it is we're trying to protect. Okay, so if we don't know what's on our networks or where our data is, it's very difficult to stop anyone taking it away. We look at, once we know that, how do we protect it? If somebody's then trying to steal it or access it, we need to be looking. So we need those sentries on the towers looking for people scaling our walls. And then we need a response. Sometimes this happens very, very quickly. The attackers can be in and out. So if you're taking days in this process, and our attackers are taking hours or minutes, everything will be gone before you notice. And then ultimately, how to recover. Okay, and we see in the phishing example, recovery from them was paying the ransom. Obviously, they perhaps didn't have a great backup regime. There's, Cisco has put this out, and so I like this one around what do you do before the attack, during the attack, and after the attack. It's the same process around trying to think of it as a life cycle and how do you operationalize security. So just pull out, in the time we've got, just like, well, what are some key things about making our layered approach defensible? And so it's defense in depth with asset management. So knowing what you own and where it is. It's alerts with context. Okay, I heard in a presentation at Cisco Live this week that 50% of security alerts are never investigated because people are just truly overwhelmed. So we need to look at things like, how does automation and orchestration, which I've got up there, help? Also monitoring and visibility. So, in the Earl's example, there was a compromise and we were letting DNS flow in and out of our organization, as you do, because you need DNS to use the internet. But it was being abused. It was a trusted protocol, and you might have heard of the phrase hiding in plain sight. So there's lots of things on your network that you expect, HTTPS, TLS sessions, you expect DNS, you expect network time protocol. There's all these, underlying protocols, both, at the network layer and application layer that are normal. So attackers try and hide inside these, and so you need to look more closely at it. Key one is segmentation. Reducing your attack surface and some good hygiene. Okay, so in my example, why was the laptop even able to see a thermostat? I mean, there's no business reason for those IP addresses to be able to communicate. So things like segmentation is a really key approach. And for any of you who are in NetAcad and been doing the networking side of things, network security is a huge piece of cybersecurity, because ultimately there's an IPv4 and IPv6 packet often underneath everything, whether that be legitimate business traffic or malicious traffic. And lastly, and that's really what Earl's organization is around, how can you benefit from threat intelligence? So asset management, this is from a survey. You can pull this from Cisco's annual security report. We won't jump through all the numbers, but the key point on this slide is if you look at the top line, you can see for these different sectors, government, healthcare, tech, finance, the number of endpoints that they thought they had on their networks. And the second line is, when they went and did a discovery, what did they really find? Okay, so there's some pretty big gaps here between what I know, and if I know about it, I can defend, versus what I don't know, and hence I have no idea if it's being defended or not. And so visibility of your assets is a key point. You can see some things here, unmanaged networks. Okay, this last one here, other paths to the internet. So in my simple example at the start, we thought, great, we've got this internet gateway, we'll lock it down with this layered approach. When they go look and say, we've got all these other ways of communicating to the internet that we didn't even know about. Who's looking at those? So visibility and knowing your environment is key. So that extends to things like device inventory, but also where your data is. Who are you people? Who's got access? What are their roles? What's your infrastructure? What's the status of it? So, these are some of the things in that identify phase that you need to be aware of. I mentioned alerts with context, and those are my little glasses boxes, just blocking out some data, because this is from an actual network, and this is looking at some data coming out of Cisco Umbrella, which is that DNS Protect service. And the point is not, someone's trying to reach some sites or some domain names which are deemed as being serving malware, but if all you got back was, hey, someone in my organization is trying to access this site which is known to host malware, what do I do? Right? That's a great piece of information, but I can't operationalize it. And this is where we need to enrich the data with some additional context. And so, let's share the IP address. Okay. At least now I can hunt down the host on my network. But that's still, how do I know? Do you know what IP address you're using right now? I don't. So you have to start looking through logs. And so we can enrich that further and say, you know what? I'm going to identify and pull out the Active Directory username. So if this is an enterprise deployment, you can pull out their Windows AD username, and now I can say, it's malware. I blocked it, which is great. And over here, I've plugged out the rest of the username, but now you can go say, who's that person? Jump on the phone, ring them up, go do that respond and recover phase. So really key to, helping defenders keep pace with the number of threats. And this is touching on the same thing. I mentioned, I can't remember the tens or hundreds of thousands of alerts or that most organizations get on their security dashboards. And they can't get round to all of them. And so a key piece, and as you graduate and move in, if you're moving into the security space, things like automation, integration, and orchestration are going to be key, especially with the billions of IoT devices that are going to be connecting to the internet. So how can we better share intelligence between our detection and our response tools, potentially automate them, or at least make it simple and quick for our responders to, close that time to contain, mean time to contain metric that many organizations track. Monitoring and visibility. So maybe from the first slide, you got the impression everything was around how do we stop them getting in? But ultimately, they might still find a path in because we didn't, they found a path we weren't aware of. We didn't have complete visibility. So maybe we want to have visibility of them on the way out. Okay, so even in the phishing one, they extracted those business files. Certainly in my example, they were stealing blueprints. And so we can look at, nothing moves on a network without leaving a fingerprint. Okay, so if you're shifting an IP packet, well, that IP packet, left a trace, a fingerprint. For Cisco, that's net flow records. So if you're already looking at net flow in your studies, we can use that as an indicator or, forensic records of what happened. And we can start analyzing that and say, that DNS traffic is legitimate, but when I look at it, it doesn't look like DNS, or the frequency is wrong, or it's going to a strange destination, or we're running a reputation service over the top of that, and that's a known malicious site, or it looks like it's created by a domain name generation algorithm. So we can get all these hints as, this flow, although it's a trusted protocol, is suspicious. And similar if we see, people say, oh, we've lost gigs and tens, if not terabytes of data. Well, that all leaves fingerprint on the network. So if you're watching that, you can say, why is terabytes of data leaving my organization? It might be a trusted protocol, but that shouldn't be happening. And so we can do a lot of things at that monitoring and visibility level. The key thing also is around segmentation. So I mentioned, my example is all around that the attacker got the foothold in the thermostat. Why could the thermostat get to blueprints in that organization? Okay, we don't have to have big flat networks. Okay, so it's again, when you know your devices, you know your assets, we can now say, well, let's use some technology. There's various ways of achieving it, but let's segment our network. So our thermostat probably should only talk to the thermostat cloud service or the controller. Our laptops probably should only speak to our servers. Our printers maybe shouldn't speak to the internet. Depends how clever they are. And if they do speak there, to a limited subset, the printer vendor perhaps for ordering new ink. So once we have this model, this strategy around how we should segment our network, we can enforce that with technology. Okay, and so that lateral propagation and gaining footholds, at least it's contained. Okay, and that'll help prevent a lot of escape vectors. Now, in both cases, in the phishing incident and in my web compromise example, there's some reliance on they did something on the endpoint. Maybe the user still ran something, but it was still malicious software. Maybe the user didn't have to click on something and they just visited a compromised website which exploited a vulnerability in their browser. And so this is actually from within Cisco around, we have a trusted device process. Around if you can meet these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, if I'm counting correctly, 9 requirements, and things like, do I have hard drive encryption or storage encryption? Do I have current antivirus? Is my operating system, whether it's Windows or Mac or Linux, is it got the latest patches? And same with the applications that run on top of it. If you can answer yes to all of these, well, Cisco IT will say, yes, you're trusted, and we'll let you get access to that gold in the center of the castle, or the data. If we fail any of those, where our trust is diminished, and we'll have some sort of restricted access. Perhaps we can't get on the network at all until we've patched our device. So, I'll stop here, because I like to, as Earl said, one of the things is, users, there's a phrase, users are the weak link, all right? So, as users, and whether, as citizens, as students, as people in business, focus on, think before you click, patch, use good password hygiene, because some of that is where I come back to in the hygiene section. Great slide, because I just mentioned hygiene. This is a statistic that just released from this Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. So you may or be aware, we have breach notification legislation in Australia. So organisations need to report when they've lost data. And when you drill down into the stats, there's a really long URL there if you like reading statistical papers. But if you look at the breaches which weren't accidental and due to human error, but were actually deemed as malicious, 3/4 of those, so the red piece, the blue and the teal, you can see they're all related to credentials, right? So whether they were phished, like the video we saw, whether they'll just I just call them dumb passwords, they were short and they got brute forced, or whether they were stolen or compromised by some other method. Most of the breaches in Australia that were reported in the last quarter aren't related to exploiting vulnerabilities. It's getting access just through credentials. And this is what I say is just one of the things around good hygiene. And the last piece is around threat intelligence. And obviously Earl's covered a lot of this around, each year there's a few annual security reports. The Cisco one is always good to read, and there's elements that have been published on it already. I'm sure you can find it by navigating our website. Verizon Data Breach Report is another one that contains a lot of good trending statistics. And one of the things they put out is most organisations that are breached are alerted by someone else other than themselves. Okay, so it's a national CERT, or it's a threat group such as Talos or someone else who alerts them that they have a problem. And so if you go into the cybersecurity area, you need to draw on the wisdom of the masses or the community intelligence model. And so organisations like Talos with their massive sensor and telemetry networks, other sources from government, other alerts to help you be informed about what are active campaigns and current threat landscape. So I'll just quickly touch, I know I'm coming up to the time, and this was my scenario about the cross-site scripting attack around if we overlay our layered defense and a defensible network approach to that, could we have stopped that attack? And you could, in your own minds, think about how this applies to phishing. So my initial web compromise, I can't do much about that website. Hey, it's a bowling alley, but I can do something about my employees' laptops. So perhaps they should have been running some DNS protection software. Perhaps they should have had antivirus. Perhaps their browser needed patching or their operating system. Maybe they should have been using a VPN all the time. There are a number of defensive techniques that perhaps could have stopped the attack at that very first stage. But even if it failed and we went through to the next phase, if people are running command was using DNS themselves as part of their reach back. So perhaps, DNS security may have stopped that phase, but maybe it didn't. So maybe we're still here and the device is now scanning the network. I said, you can't scan a network without leaving a footprint, a fingerprint on the network. So again, maybe network telemetry would have said, hey, why is Richard's laptop scanning every IP address in the organization? That's a bit weird. That's not what he does every day. So maybe there would have been an alert there. Already mentioned segmentation. Maybe you shouldn't have found the controller in the first place. Maybe that thermostat should have been in its own dedicated VLAN, isolated from everything else. And certainly if our thermostat starts scanning the network, well, that's very strange indeed. Again, anomalous behavior that we could detect. Hopefully you can see that potentially there's something in our layered defense approach, as well as knowing our assets and an approach to operationalizing security, that maybe they would never had the exfil, maybe the phishing attack never would have actually got ransomware. So with that, I'll leave you with this, that when if you're looking at cybersecurity, and I know there's a huge component of that in the NetAcad program, that it's a combination of both the layered approach and the technologies, but it's how you all tie it together and have some success as a defender. So with that, I thank you for your time.